So, here's the situation. I'm sitting at my desk, typing away at work, trying to finish up a report that I'd put off for way too long. It was one of those days where everything seemed like it was going fine. The office was quieter than usual, so I had the chance to focus and finally catch up. I'm not the type to leave personal stuff on my phone when I'm at work, pretty disciplined, really, so my phone sat charging on the desk, out of sight, while I focused on my task. Then, during a break, I decided to check my messages. I had a few texts from friends asking how my weekend was, some random group chats buzzing, and a message from my mom asking if I'd eaten that day. Typical stuff, nothing that should have been alarming. But then I saw a text from my ex, Chris. He was the guy I had been in a pretty intense relationship with for about 2 years before we broke up about 2 years ago, and since then, we've kept things casual. Not exactly friends, but also not enemies. Just, in that weird limbo zone where you occasionally reach out but you know you're not going back to each other. Now, our breakup had been kind of messy. The final straw was me realizing that we had grown apart and that we didn't want the same things out of life. But the actual breakup conversation was like pulling teeth. I had told him I needed space, and he, being the emotionally immature guy he was, went on a whole rant about how he didn't understand and didn't want to let go. It was awkward, but after a few months, I started to heal. I moved on, met new people, and even had a few short relationships here and there. But I'll admit, I always thought about Chris every now and then. We'd text, check in once in a while, but nothing significant. So, on this particular day, I saw that he had texted me. "Hey, how've you been?" was the message. Nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual small talk. I had a bit of free time, so I thought I'd reply. Here's where things went off the rails. As I was typing my response, I was thinking about how much I missed him, how much I regretted how we ended things, and how maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe I had been unfair to him. Maybe I was still angry, but deep down, I just wished things had turned out differently. I thought about how I had always hoped he would change, how I had kept looking for signs that he would be the person I wanted him to be. Anyway, I wrote this long message. In it, I told him that I thought about the past sometimes and regretted the way we broke up. I told him I had always cared about him, still thought about him, and wondered if maybe we could give things another shot someday. I even threw in a comment about how I felt like I was never truly over him. It was probably a little too much, but I guess I was emotional. So, what did I do? Instead of sending it to Chris, I sent it to my current boyfriend, Jake. Now, let me clarify, Jake is an amazing guy. He's smart, funny, caring, and unlike Chris, he's emotionally available and mature. We've been dating for almost a year now, and I genuinely love him. But the thing about Jake is that he's very sensitive. He's had his own share of relationship trauma, so we've been working on building trust and communication from the start. I've worked hard to make him feel loved and secure. But sending a text like that? That would be a whole different level of emotional disaster. I had absolutely no idea that I had sent the message to Jake until I saw the red notification pop up on my phone. I stared at it for a second, confused. I knew I hadn't seen him read anything from me. And then it hit me. I grabbed my phone and quickly checked the message thread. And, of course, there it was, my heartfelt message about how I wasn't over my ex. For a second, I froze. I didn't know what to do. I stared at the screen, panicking, trying to think of an explanation. Maybe I could just say it was meant for someone else. But then, I realized there was no way to explain this away without it looking awful. I couldn't even pretend it was some kind of accidental slip. This was a full, emotional message, and it was clear who it was about. I immediately called Jake. My heart was racing as I watched the phone ring. I could barely breathe, knowing that everything I had worked so hard to build with him might crumble in an instant. "Hey," Jake answered, his voice calm, almost too calm. "You okay?" I choked out a nervous laugh. "Yeah, I need to explain something." "Okay," he said, but I could tell he was already on edge. I accidentally sent you a text," I started. "It was meant for someone else." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him sigh, and I could feel the tension in his voice when he spoke next. "Are you saying that you still have feelings for your ex?" he asked quietly. I felt the blood drain from my face. I could barely respond. No, it's not like that." Jake interrupted me. "Then why would you send that to me? Why would you say something like that if you didn't mean it?" I tried to explain, but every word that came out of my mouth just sounded worse. I could hear the hurt in his voice. "Jake, I swear it was an accident. I've been thinking about it lately, but that doesn't mean I want to go back to him. I love you." I was grasping at straws, trying to make this make sense. But Jake wasn't having it. "I just don't understand. I thought we were doing well. But now this. This is a lot to process." He paused again. "I need some space to think." I agreed, though I knew things would never be the same. That evening, we barely spoke. We exchanged a few short texts about the logistics of him coming to pick up some of his things, and that was it. The following day, he told me he couldn't continue the relationship. "I need someone who's 100% sure about me," he said. I felt like I had ruined something beautiful because of one stupid, emotional moment. The worst part? A few days later, I got a message from Chris asking if I was okay. It was kind, but it hit me like a ton of bricks. What was I even doing? Why was I still dwelling on a past I should have let go of? I guess this is one of those stories where you learn the hard way that sometimes, it's not about the message you send. It's about the feelings you didn't deal with when you should have. I still have to live with the fact that I lost someone who truly cared about me because of a mistake that should have never happened. TLDR, sent an emotional message about my ex to my current boyfriend by mistake. He found out, and now we're not together anymore. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. I still can't believe what I did, and I'm pretty sure my friends will never let me live it down. This happened just last weekend, and it feels like it was straight out of a comedy show. It started as a typical Saturday afternoon, with the weather finally warming up enough to hang out outside, and I was invited to a barbecue at my buddy's house. I've been friends with Dave for years, and we all meet up there fairly regularly for a little drinking, grilling, and catching up. This time, it was a bit of a special occasion because Dave had just bought a new grill and had been hyping it up for weeks. He was excited to show it off, so naturally, we were all eager to see if it was as impressive as he claimed. The group of us arrived, exchanged some hugs and hellos, and quickly got into the spirit of things. The atmosphere was great, beer was flowing, music was playing, and everyone was in a relaxed mood. I wasn't really expecting anything out of the ordinary, but that's when I made my first mistake. You see, I'm not exactly the most socially graceful person. I don't always think before I speak, and I tend to get a bit overexcited in situations like these. Now, Dave had mentioned he had this special recipe for burgers that he was going to make. Apparently, it was some kind of secret sauce and a blend of ingredients he'd been working on for months. He was proud of it, and honestly, it sounded great. I was already salivating at the thought of a juicy, perfectly cooked burger, so when it came time to start grilling, I was eager to see what all the hype was about. As Dave began preparing the patties, the conversation shifted to the various ways people like their burgers cooked. Of course, being the loudmouth that I am, I chimed in and said something along the lines of, "Yeah, well, if it's cooked beyond medium rare, it's basically ruined." I know. Not the most tactful thing to say. I had no idea that it would cause such a huge reaction. One of the guys, Jake, immediately shot me a look of horror, and he started to protest. "You've got to be kidding me. Medium rare is for amateurs," Jake said, looking visibly disgusted. "If you're not cooking a burger to at least medium, you're just wasting meat." Before I could even respond, Dave jumped in, trying to smooth things over. "It's all about the seasoning, man. These burgers will be amazing no matter how you cook 'em." I nodded, trying to play it cool, but inside, I was mentally kicking myself. I hadn't meant to come off as pretentious or like some sort of food snob, but clearly, that's how it was received. In my head, I was thinking, who cares how the meat is cooked? It's all about the flavor. But I didn't want to cause more tension, so I decided to just let it go and enjoy the beer. Fast forward about 15 minutes, and Dave was putting the final touches on the burgers. He set the grill to medium heat, placed the patties down, and let them sizzle away. The smell was mouth-watering, and everyone was starting to get impatient for their share. The conversation shifted to other topics as we waited for the burgers to cook, but I couldn't help myself, my mind kept drifting back to the food. Finally, it was time to eat. Dave proudly announced that the burgers were ready, and we all gathered around the table to dig in. I grabbed mine, took a bite, and immediately felt a strange sensation. It wasn't unpleasant, but it definitely wasn't what I was expecting. The burger was, well done. Not just medium well, but borderline burnt. I froze for a moment, wondering if I had somehow misjudged the situation. Maybe it was a fluke? Maybe it was just a small mistake? But as I looked around, I noticed that everyone else seemed to be enjoying their burgers, so I figured I should probably just power through it. At that moment, Jake, the guy who had argued with me earlier, let out a loud laugh and said, "So, I guess you're happy with this, huh?" I didn't know what to say. My stomach was starting to churn because I could tell the burger was seriously overcooked. I tried to salvage the moment by making a joke, but it only made things worse. "Well, I guess Dave's special sauce makes even well-done burgers taste great, huh?" I said, trying to lighten the mood. But that's when things went sideways. Dave, who had been eagerly waiting for compliments on his new grill and his secret recipe, looked me dead in the eye and said, "Well, that's the thing, man. I was trying to do what you wanted. I thought you'd be happy with them cooked medium rare, but then I remembered that you said you wouldn't want anything beyond medium rare. So I cooked the whole batch well done just to make sure no one would complain." My jaw dropped. The burgers weren't cooked the way Dave wanted, they were cooked the way I had accidentally told everyone I liked them. I tried to backpedal, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. Dave and the rest of the group looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and mild amusement. The tension in the air was palpable. I felt like I had dug myself into an irreversible hole. I tried to laugh it off, but every attempt to deflect the situation just made it worse. My friends weren't mad at me, but they definitely weren't going to let me live it down. The rest of the evening was awkward. I kept trying to apologize, but every time I said something, it just seemed to make the situation even more cringeworthy. Finally, I decided to just shut up and focus on eating, though I could tell that no matter how much I tried to enjoy the food, I was never going to live this one down. A few days later, I received a text from Jake with a picture of a well-done burger and a message that said, "Hope you're enjoying your perfect burger, Mr. Medium Rare." I honestly don't think I'll ever live that one down. Every time we meet up now, someone inevitably brings up the well-done burger incident. If I ever want to order a burger at a restaurant or talk about grilling again, I'll probably get a chorus of, "Oh, you mean medium rare, right?" So yeah, TIFU by opening my big mouth about how I like my burgers and unintentionally ruining everyone's dinner by making them cook a whole batch of well-done burgers. Maybe next time I'll just keep my opinions to myself. So, this all started when I decided to be spontaneous. Now, normally I'm a pretty boring person. I follow routines, stick to my daily tasks, and never stray too far from my comfort zone. But for some reason, last week, I had this wild urge to do something completely out of character. I had recently read a couple of stories online about people getting into crazy situations by doing something unpredictable, and I guess I wanted to add my own chapter to that genre. The plan was simple: I would skip work one Friday and go on a random adventure. I didn't have a particular destination in mind, just wanted to drive around and see where I ended up. I figured I'd enjoy some alone time, get away from my usual stresses, and maybe even get a little lost. So, I called in sick, packed a bag, and hopped into my car. After about an hour of driving, I found myself deep in the countryside, somewhere I had never been before. The road was quiet, with only the occasional farmhouse and a few scattered barns dotting the landscape. I felt free, alive, and surprisingly unbothered by the fact that I had no clear direction. That was until I passed a sign that read, "Welcome to Dusty Pines, population 380. Now, normally I wouldn't stop in such a small town, but something about it felt inviting. Maybe it was the fact that I hadn't seen a single other car in the last 30 minutes, or maybe it was because I remembered reading about this town in an article about quirky, off-the-beaten-path destinations. Either way, I turned off the main road and headed toward the town center. I drove around for a bit, admiring the old, charming buildings that lined the streets. There was an eerie stillness in the air, and for some reason, the town felt like it was stuck in time. There weren't many people walking around, but I did see an older man sitting on a bench outside the post office. He gave me a nod as I drove by, and I returned a half-hearted wave, not wanting to seem too out of place. Eventually, I found a small diner tucked into a corner of the town square. It was old-fashioned, with neon signs flickering in the windows and a rusty jukebox playing in the corner. The smell of fresh coffee and bacon wafted through the air, and my stomach growled in response. I decided that this was as good a place as any to stop and grab a bite. I walked in and was immediately greeted by the waitress, a middle-aged woman with a stern face but kind eyes. "What can I get you, hon?" she asked, her voice soft yet assertive. "Just a coffee and maybe something light to eat," I said, my mind still trying to process the fact that I had just randomly ended up in this tiny town. She nodded and walked off to the counter, where she poured me a cup of coffee and slid it over to me. As I took my first sip, I couldn't help but notice how quiet the place was. The other patrons, who were sitting at the counter, didn't seem to talk much, and the air was thick with the sound of clinking silverware and the low hum of the jukebox. It was almost as if everyone was silently judging me for being an outsider. I sat there for a while, sipping my coffee and staring out the window. My mind wandered, and I started to think about how strange it was that I had ended up in a town like this. What was I even doing here? Who were these people? Why had I thought that driving to a place I had no connection to would somehow be a fulfilling experience? As I sat there, the waitress returned to take my order for food. I glanced up at the menu, but nothing really stood out to me. It all seemed so basic. Then, out of nowhere, a man in his late 50s walked into the diner, wearing a baseball cap and a flannel shirt. He gave the waitress a quick nod and sat at the counter next to me. He was a bit scruffy, with a rugged look that suggested he had spent most of his life working outdoors. I didn't think much of it at first, but then he turned to me and smiled. "Looks like you're new around here," he said, his voice deep and raspy. I nodded, offering a polite smile. "Yeah, just passing through. I figured I'd stop and grab something to eat." He chuckled. "Well, you're in the right place for that. This town's got some history, lot of people come through here and never leave. Something about the place, you know?" I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Really? What's so special about Dusty Pines?" He leaned in closer, his face serious now. "Let's just say there's more to this place than meets the eye. Some of the folks here are different. Not in a bad way, mind you, just peculiar. You might notice it if you stick around long enough." I chuckled, thinking he was just messing with me. "Peculiar? Like what?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a sip from his own coffee and looked around the room as though he was making sure no one else was listening. Then, in a hushed tone, he leaned in even closer and whispered, "You ever heard of the Dusty Pines curse?" At this point, I figured he was just a local eccentric with a good story to tell, so I played along. "No, I haven't." "What's that about?" He gave me a knowing look. "You stick around here long enough, and you'll find out. Just make sure you're careful who you trust. People around here have been, well, changed, after a while. You start noticing things that aren't right." My curiosity piqued, I pressed further. "What do you mean, changed?" The man gave a small, cryptic smile. "You'll see. Everyone who stays here long enough ends up part of the town. You can feel it. Something about this place, it gets into your bones." I tried to laugh it off, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Was this some sort of small-town conspiracy? Or was he just an oddball with too much time on his hands? After a few moments of awkward silence, the waitress returned to take my order. The man didn't say another word to me, and I thought maybe I had just encountered a local who enjoyed spooking out tourists. I paid for my coffee, thanked the waitress, and left the diner, still unsure of whether or not I'd been part of some elaborate joke. As I stepped outside and got back into my car, I felt a weird sensation, like the town was watching me. Maybe it was all in my head, but the entire experience felt off. I decided to leave and head back to the main road. But as I turned the car around, I noticed something strange. There was no sign for the highway anymore. I had driven in one direction, but now it felt like the road had changed somehow, like it wasn't the same one I had entered the town on. Panicking, I turned the car around again, trying to retrace my steps, but the streets were all unfamiliar. I stopped at an intersection and looked around, only to see the same post office I had passed earlier. The man's words about the town getting into your bones echoed in my mind. Maybe he was right. Maybe Dusty Pines wasn't as innocent as it seemed. Finally, after what felt like hours of driving in circles, I found the main road again. I hit the gas and didn't look back. As I finally left the town behind me, I saw one last thing, the old man from earlier sitting on the same bench, staring at me with an unsettling smile. I don't know what happened in Dusty Pines, but I'll never be back again. Some places are better left undiscovered. TIFU by accidentally starting a fight at a wedding and nearly ruining my best friend's big day. So, a bit of context, I'm a pretty easygoing guy, but I have a tendency to drink a bit too much when I'm at weddings. You know the situation, open bar, friends everywhere, and the general vibe of it's a celebration, let's go wild. I've been to a lot of weddings over the years, and I've never caused any major drama. I mean, I've had my share of embarrassing moments, but nothing catastrophic. But this time, I completely messed up. It all started at my best friend's wedding. We'll call him Mark. Mark and I have been friends since elementary school, so I was honored when he asked me to be his best man. The wedding was in a fancy venue, with tons of people, and everything was perfect. The ceremony was beautiful, the reception was going smoothly, and I was just soaking in the atmosphere. You know, one of those moments when everything feels right, and you're thinking about how happy everyone is. Everything was going fine until we hit the open bar. Now, I wouldn't say I'm a heavy drinker, but when I'm in a celebratory mood, I tend to throw back a couple too many. So, I started with a beer, then a whiskey, and before I knew it, I was 3 drinks in and feeling pretty great. And that's when I made my first mistake. I had been chatting with Mark's cousins, whom I'd met a few times over the years but never really bonded with. We were laughing about old high school stories, and one of them, let's call him Dave, brought up this one time I did something dumb in college. The story was hilarious, but I guess my beer-fueled confidence kicked in because I decided to share a story of my own. The thing is, my story was about something that happened at a party when I was a little younger. It wasn't a bad story, but it definitely wasn't wedding material. I won't go into details, but let's just say it involved some questionable decisions, a bit of public embarrassment, and an uncomfortable situation with a friend of Mark's now wife. I thought it was funny at the time, but when I finished telling it, there was this awkward silence. You could tell that the people I was talking to didn't know how to respond. I glanced around and saw a few confused faces, but it didn't hit me immediately that I had gone too far. I kept drinking and moved on to another group of people at the wedding, thinking that everything was fine. But the night was about to take a turn for the worse. I wandered over to where the bride's family was sitting. Now, I didn't know most of them very well, but I knew one of her cousins. Let's call her Sarah. Sarah was a nice girl, friendly, easy to talk to, and we started chatting about random things. I may have been a bit more talkative than usual, but I felt comfortable enough. And I guess, in my slightly buzzed state, I didn't realize that I was starting to talk a little too much. Somewhere in the conversation, I accidentally mentioned the story from earlier. Yes, the one about the awkward situation with Mark's wife's friend. As soon as the words left my mouth, Sarah's face dropped. She turned to me with this completely stunned expression and said, "Wait, that was bride's name's friend?" I froze. My heart sank. Yeah. I mean, she's married now, but, I trailed off, not really sure how to salvage the situation. But Sarah wasn't listening anymore. She just stood up and hurriedly walked away. I thought maybe I had just made her uncomfortable, but honestly, I was too drunk to process it fully. A few minutes later, I felt someone tap me on the shoulder. I turned around to see Mark standing there, looking, not angry, but definitely not pleased. "Can we talk for a second?" he said quietly, pulling me away from the crowd. I immediately knew something was wrong. Mark took me outside the reception hall, away from the music and the noise, and then he hit me with it. "Dude," he said, his voice low, "what the hell was that?" I blinked, trying to focus. "What are you talking about?" "You just mentioned bride's name's friend," Mark said, running his hand through his hair. "The one you were talking about earlier. I mean, it was a messed up story to tell, but that's not the worst part. That girl is still really close with bride's name, and you just dropped this bomb on the whole wedding." I stood there, stunned. "Wait, you mean I wasn't supposed to talk about that?" Mark gave me a look like I should have known better. "You really shouldn't have, man. Bride's name has no idea what happened between you and her friend, and now her entire family thinks you just aired some dirty laundry about her. You're making this whole thing uncomfortable for everyone, especially her." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My buzzed confidence completely vanished, replaced by a cold, sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. I had no idea I had screwed up so badly. Mark kept going, explaining that the bride was really upset and didn't want to deal with any more drama. I apologized profusely, but I could tell the damage had already been done. Mark, being the good guy that he is, tried to smooth things over, but the atmosphere had shifted. It was like a dark cloud hung over the reception, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had single-handedly ruined what should have been a perfect day. The rest of the evening was a blur. I tried to stay out of the way, and when it was time for the speeches, I had to awkwardly stand up as the best man and give my speech while the entire room was still a bit on edge. I fumbled through it, apologized again to the bride and groom, and sat back down, hoping to disappear. At the end of the night, I made sure to find the bride and apologize to her directly. I told her I was really sorry, but she just smiled tightly and said, "It's okay, but please don't ever do that again." I think she was being polite, but I could tell she was hurt. I left the wedding early, feeling completely embarrassed and defeated. I didn't even stay for the after-party. I just couldn't face anyone. I'm not proud of what happened. In fact, it's one of the most embarrassing moments of my life. I had no idea that a small slip of the tongue could cause so much damage, but I learned a hard lesson about keeping my stories to myself, especially when they involve people who aren't part of the joke. Mark and I are still good friends, but I've definitely learned to tone down my drinking at weddings, and be a lot more careful with what I say. To this day, I cringe when I think about that night. I hope I can redeem myself, but I don't know if I'll ever fully shake the guilt of nearly ruining my best friend's wedding. So, yeah. TIFU by telling the wrong story at a wedding and almost destroying my best friend's big day. Never again. Never again. TIFU by accidentally sending my boss a very personal message. It all started when I was having a particularly stressful week at work. My team was in the middle of a huge project, and everything that could go wrong did. My emails were getting buried under a mountain of new requests, meetings were constantly running over time, and my to-do list looked like it would take an army of me's to even make a dent in it. To make matters worse, my personal life wasn't exactly on the up and up either. I had been going through a rough patch with my girlfriend, and we had been fighting about everything. So yeah, I was stressed to the max. One day, during my lunch break, I decided to take a breather and send a text to my girlfriend. We hadn't spoken much that day because of a huge fight we'd had the night before. I pulled up my phone, scrolled to her contact, and began typing a long message about how sorry I was, how much I loved her, and how I wanted to fix things. I told her I missed her, and that I knew I hadn't been a great boyfriend lately, but I wanted to make things right. I poured my heart into this message. I made sure it was thoughtful and sincere. I added a bunch of emojis to soften the tone, because I knew she liked that, and I hit send. Then, as I went back to my computer, I realized that I had forgotten to check my work email. Normally, I would have finished this on my phone, but I had gotten so wrapped up in the conversation with my girlfriend that I'd been ignoring my work inbox. I opened up my email app and started scrolling through the messages that had piled up in the last hour. As I was reading through an email from a client, I heard a notification on my phone. It was a message from my girlfriend. She'd sent a text back, and she was clearly annoyed. She had told me she was feeling overwhelmed too, and that she needed space. I wasn't happy with that response, so I decided to reply quickly. I swiped my phone open and, without thinking, started typing. In my rush, I didn't notice that I had opened the wrong conversation. I thought I was responding to my girlfriend, but I was actually responding to my boss. Now, my boss isn't someone I'd describe as close in any way. I mean, I respect him, but our relationship is strictly professional. He's a no-nonsense guy who's always serious, and we rarely ever chat outside of work topics. So, you can imagine my shock when I sent a message meant for my girlfriend to my boss instead. Here's the thing. I had accidentally copied and pasted part of the message I had sent my girlfriend earlier. That's right. I sent my boss a full-on, emotional, lovey-dovey apology text. I didn't realize this until a few seconds after I had hit send. I looked down at my phone in horror as I saw the notification pop up. I immediately pulled open my email app to see if he had responded. The message was something like this: "Hey babe, I know I haven't been the best boyfriend lately, and I'm really sorry for that. I love you more than anything, and I miss you so much. I just want to make things right. I know I haven't been listening, and I promise I'll do better. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Please don't be mad at me anymore." Red heart. I stared at the screen, wide-eyed, absolutely frozen. I had no idea how to fix this. I could already imagine what was going through my boss's mind. What the hell was probably the least of his concerns. I quickly typed out a frantic follow-up message, trying to salvage the situation. I wrote, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, that was for someone else. Ignore the previous message. Please, please don't fire me." I was not trying to be weird. I sent it. It wasn't much, but it was the best I could come up with in my panicked state. Then, I waited. I sat there staring at my phone for what felt like hours, refreshing my inbox every few minutes. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I got a response. But it wasn't what I expected. The email simply said, "Got it. Thanks for the update." I wasn't sure if he was trolling me or genuinely didn't care. Maybe he just didn't want to deal with it. Either way, I was mortified. My entire body felt hot, like I was about to combust. To make matters worse, he didn't say anything else about it at all. No hey, no worries, I get it, or even a what was that about. It was as though nothing had happened. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept replaying the moment in my head, wondering if I had just ruined my career. For the rest of the week, every time I saw my boss, I felt like I was about to burst into flames. He wasn't acting any different, but I couldn't help but feel that weird, awkward tension in the air. I'd be lying if I said I didn't avoid looking him directly in the eye whenever we had to interact. It didn't help that my coworkers started to catch on. One of them, who was always quick to notice when something was off, asked me in a whisper, "Hey, did you accidentally send something personal to your boss yesterday?" I was caught off guard, but I nodded sheepishly. "Yup, you totally did," she said, barely suppressing a grin. "That's gonna be a fun one to explain." I felt my stomach drop. It wasn't exactly helping with my stress levels to know that my mistake was the office gossip of the week. Over the next few days, I tried my best to keep my head down. I still didn't know what my boss thought of the whole thing, but the uncertainty was eating me alive. I started to question if I was going to get called into his office for a talk about the incident. Or worse, if he was going to fire me. The longer he didn't mention it, the more I felt like I was walking on eggshells. But then, after what felt like forever, he finally acknowledged it, sort of. It was a Friday afternoon when it happened. I was sitting at my desk, trying to wrap up the week's work, when I heard him approach. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, looking over my shoulder as I typed away, and I immediately tensed up. Finally, he cleared his throat and said, "Hey, I just wanted to let you know that everything's fine. Don't worry about that message. It happens to the best of us." I blinked at him, not sure if he was being serious or sarcastic. "Really?" "Because I thought you were going to fire me," I replied, trying to sound casual. He smirked. "Nah, just don't send me any more of those lovey-dovey messages. I've got a wife for that." He paused, then added, "And hey, if you need to take some time off to work on your relationship, I'm sure we can figure something out." That was the moment I realized he wasn't mad. He wasn't even bothered. He was just indifferent. And that, in a way, was even worse. I've never been so grateful to make it through an awkward work situation without being fired. To this day, I still cringe every time I see him, but I guess that's just the price I had to pay for accidentally sending my heart out to my boss instead of my girlfriend. Never again will I send a message without checking who it's going to first. I didn't think a random text message could change my life forever, but here we are. It all started on a lazy Saturday afternoon. I was lounging on my couch, binge-watching some random Netflix series that I'd already seen 3 times, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from my friend, Alex. "Hey, you free tonight? Got something fun planned. Need you for backup." I rolled my eyes. Alex had a knack for making everything sound way more mysterious than it really was. Backup? For what? I was expecting some kind of lame scheme, but whatever. We'd been friends for years, and his fun always ended up being something ridiculously stupid but entertaining. So, I replied, "Sure, what's the plan?" He sent back a single emoji of a pair of sunglasses and then followed it with a simple "meet me at 8." I shrugged, set my phone down, and resumed my show. I had no idea what I was about to get myself into. Fast forward to 8 p.m., and I showed up at the usual bar where we always met. I walked in and spotted Alex at the back, sitting at a table with a couple of guys I didn't recognize. They looked normal enough, though one of them had a very intense look on his face, like he was always in deep thought. Alex grinned when he saw me, waving me over enthusiastically. "Dude. Come sit, we're about to make some moves tonight." "Moves? What kind of moves?" "You'll see," Alex said cryptically, his grin widening. I took a seat, glancing at the 2 strangers. The intense guy was wearing a leather jacket that seemed way too hot for the weather, and the other was wearing a plain t-shirt, but there was something about his presence that made me feel like I was about to be dragged into something weird. Okay, I said, looking at Alex. What's going on? All right, so we're doing a bit of a treasure hunt tonight, Alex began, as if he were sharing the most thrilling secret ever. It's a bit unorthodox, but it's going to be fun. Trust me. Treasure hunt? I asked, raising an eyebrow. What are we, pirates now? Alex just laughed. Sort of. Look, it's a thing we do with a few people we know. It's about finding hidden clues, solving riddles, and ultimately finding a prize. I stared at him. So, this is just some weird scavenger hunt thing? Exactly. But there's a catch. You can't do it alone. You need a team, and you're the last member of ours. Think of it like an escape room, but without the walls. I wasn't convinced, but I'd already committed by showing up. Okay, sure, whatever. I'm in. The guy in the leather jacket spoke for the first time. There's a secret location where we'll start. It's been passed down for generations. The prize, if you manage to find it, is something worth a lot of money. I nearly choked on my drink. Wait, you're telling me this is some kind of treasure hunt with a real prize? Alex just smiled. Yeah, but there's a twist. You have to follow the rules. No cheating, no shortcuts. If you do, you're out. Got it? I nodded, but I wasn't fully buying into this whole thing. It sounded like a scam or some weird initiation for something I wasn't even sure about. But hey, I'd come this far. Plus, I had no other plans, so why not? All right, Alex said, pulling out a small envelope from his jacket pocket and sliding it across the table to me. Your first clue. You solve this, and we'll move to the next stage. I opened the envelope and found a single note inside. It was a riddle, written in elegant cursive. The words were, "Where water meets earth and time stands still, your journey begins." I stared at it for a second. It was cryptic, but I wasn't exactly a stranger to riddles. I looked around at the group, who were all staring at me. Any ideas? I asked. The guy in the leather jacket nodded. Think about it. Water and earth. That's where you start. Is this a joke? I muttered, but Alex just smiled, shaking his head. You got this. It's not that hard. After a minute of thought, it clicked. The fountain. There's a fountain at the park just off Main Street. Alex jumped up. Bingo. Let's go. We all piled into Alex's car, and he sped toward the park. When we arrived, the fountain was eerily empty, no one was around, which I thought was strange considering it was a Saturday night. There, the guy in the leather jacket pointed. Look at the base of the fountain. There, partially obscured by some overgrown ivy, was a small stone with a symbol engraved on it. I bent down to get a closer look, and there was another riddle carved into the stone. To find the next clue, seek the light that never burns. I immediately knew what it meant. The lighthouse, I said, standing up straight. That's the next stop. We piled back into the car and made our way to the coast. The lighthouse was an old, towering structure, mostly abandoned these days, but it had always been a local landmark. When we arrived, the door was surprisingly unlocked. I figured someone must have left it open by mistake, but the vibe in the air felt off. As we made our way up the spiraling staircase, the walls felt colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long. At the top, there was a chest sitting in the middle of the floor. It was ancient-looking, almost too perfect to be real. Alex reached out, his hand trembling with excitement as he opened it, revealing stacks of cash and jewels. But the real shock came when Alex pulled out an old, leather-bound book. The cover was cracked, but it was clear this was the prize they were looking for. I can't believe it, Alex muttered. This is it. This is what they've been hunting for all these years. Before any of us could react, the guy in the leather jacket grabbed the book from Alex's hands and backed away quickly. His eyes were wild with something I couldn't quite understand. You don't get it, he said, voice low and dangerous. This wasn't meant for you. And that's when I realized, the whole thing had been a setup. This wasn't some silly treasure hunt. It was a trap. To be honest, I don't even know what happened after that. The last thing I remember was Alex trying to stop the guy, but the man ran out of the lighthouse, disappearing into the night. We were left standing there, in stunned silence, realizing we'd been part of something far darker than we could have ever imagined. Turns out, the book wasn't just some valuable artifact. It was a key to something much worse. But that's a story for another time. All I know is, I won't be getting involved in any more of Alex's fun plans anytime soon. That night changed everything. TIFU by accidentally turning my entire neighborhood into a temporary no-fly zone. So, this all started last Friday. I was feeling pretty proud of myself, as I had recently invested in a new drone, something I had been eyeing for months. I'd read up on drone safety, learned all the regulations, and even watched a bunch of YouTube tutorials on how to fly the thing without crashing it into a tree, or worse, someone's face. I was ready. The drone was sleek, the controller was in my hands, and I was going to make my backyard the coolest place in the neighborhood. I live in a suburban area, and there's a park nearby that has a large open space, perfect for testing out a new drone. After a few warm-up flights in my backyard to get used to the controls, I decided it was time to take the drone for a spin in the park. My first mistake? Not checking to see if there were any temporary no-fly zones in the area. But hey, how often does that happen? I thought. Who would care about a drone in a park? Well, as soon as I reached the park, I set the drone down, synced it to my phone, and was off. I was amazed at how easy it was to control. The drone shot up into the sky, and I was flying it in circles, doing some cool spins and loops. It felt like I was a pro already. The sun was shining, the wind was calm, and I was feeling pretty damn confident. Then came my second mistake, I got cocky. I decided it would be a great idea to fly the drone as high as I could, just to see how far it would go. Now, I had no idea that there were flight restrictions in place for certain heights or that some areas around my neighborhood had a specific altitude cap. But I didn't know what I didn't know, so I pushed the drone higher, higher, higher. I was up at 400 feet when things started to go a little wrong. The drone suddenly beeped and displayed a warning on my phone. Something about increased interference. At first, I thought it was a glitch, so I didn't panic. I gave the controls a little nudge, and the drone seemed to correct itself for a moment. That was my third mistake, ignoring the warning. I should have brought it back down, but I figured the issue would resolve itself. After all, this was a brand new, expensive drone. It wasn't supposed to just malfunction, right? Turns out, I was very wrong. The warning didn't go away. Instead, it turned into an urgent message, loss of GPS signal. And then the worst possible notification I could imagine, no connection to controller. At that point, I panicked. I frantically waved the controller around, hoping that somehow it would regain connection. But nothing happened. The drone was still floating up there, somewhere, at 400 feet. And now, it wasn't coming back. That's when I started to hear sirens. At first, I thought it was just some random fire truck driving down the street, but then I saw a police car zoom by. And another. And another. I looked around and saw a helicopter slowly circling in the distance. It dawned on me that something major was happening, and I was suddenly very, very nervous. I took out my phone and tried to access the drone's camera feed, but I couldn't get a signal. Then I remembered that the drone had been flying above the restricted airspace for the airport nearby. I knew it wasn't just any small-town airport, this was a busy regional hub. Panic set in. In my cocky drone-flying euphoria, I had somehow triggered a no-fly zone alert. This was exactly the kind of thing that could shut down an entire airspace if it wasn't handled right away. Sure enough, after a few more minutes of frantically trying to reconnect with my drone, I saw a group of police officers near the park. They were all staring up at the sky. And then one of them looked at me, and I swear, his eyes narrowed. I knew immediately that he had figured out where the drone was coming from. I slowly started walking toward him, trying to act casual, but he intercepted me before I could get very far. "You the one flying the drone?" he asked, his voice a mix of frustration and disbelief. I hesitated, unsure of how to play it. Yeah. Is there a problem?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he kept staring at the sky. At that moment, I realized the drone was still up there, hovering like a giant blinking eye in the sky. It was clear that it wasn't just hovering for fun. It was causing a major problem. The officer didn't waste any time. He immediately radioed for backup, and before I knew it, there were more patrol cars arriving. They told me I had unknowingly activated the restricted airspace alert, which sent a signal to the FAA and caused a temporary flight ban over the park area. They explained that the local airspace had been briefly shut down for safety, which, as you can imagine, caused chaos at the nearby airport. I tried to explain that it was a total accident. I told them I had no idea I was even near the restricted zone. But they were already in full serious business mode. They told me they'd have to confiscate the drone for further investigation. After some back and forth, the situation got worse. They informed me that the incident had led to a delay in flight schedules for incoming flights, which, in turn, affected passengers. The delay wasn't huge, but still, planes had to adjust their flight paths because of my tiny mistake. By this point, I was shaking. I tried to apologize, but the whole situation felt so surreal that I could barely form words. In the end, the drone was taken into evidence, and they issued me a fine for interfering with aviation operations. A fine that I honestly never thought would come my way, especially for something so innocent as flying a drone. Now, here's the kicker. As I was walking back to my car, embarrassed and furious at myself, I saw a news helicopter hovering overhead. I swear, I saw a guy with a camera filming right down at the park. Apparently, it made the news in a few local outlets, and they even got footage of the drone hovering in the air before it was grounded. So, yeah. I managed to turn my fun weekend hobby into a temporary no-fly zone and delayed flights for people just trying to get to their destination. I'm now the proud owner of a huge fine, a temporarily confiscated drone, and a solid reputation as the guy who nearly caused an aviation disaster for no reason at all. Moral of the story? Don't get cocky with drones, and definitely check for flight restrictions before you send your shiny new toy up into the sky. You never know when you might turn your entire neighborhood into a no-fly zone. TIFU, by accidentally starting a small fire in my apartment while trying to impress my date with my cooking skills. So, let me set the stage. I, 27M, had been talking to this girl, 25F, for a few weeks. We met through mutual friends, and after a couple of casual hangouts, we finally decided to make things a bit more official with an actual dinner date at my place. I was excited because, well, she seemed really cool, and I had this image of myself as the chill guy who can cook in my head. In my mind, cooking a nice meal would be a great way to impress her. But, as with all my best intentions, this plan quickly spiraled out of control. Now, I'm not a terrible cook, but I wouldn't exactly call myself a chef either. I can make the basics: spaghetti, chicken stir-fry, that kind of thing. But for this special night, I decided to make something a bit more complex, a homemade lasagna. Yeah, lasagna. Not the easiest dish to make when you're trying to keep everything low-key, but I wanted to go the extra mile. Plus, I thought it would be impressive. I spent the afternoon prepping, chopping, and layering everything just right. I even went out of my way to buy all the fresh ingredients, a mix of ricotta, mozzarella, fresh basil, ground beef, and, of course, the pasta sheets. The kitchen smelled amazing, and I was feeling confident. Now, here's where things started to go wrong. I was working with a recipe I had found online, which seemed pretty straightforward. However, I somehow misinterpreted one of the instructions, specifically the part about setting the oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. I assumed that meant preheat the oven to 375 before putting the lasagna in. But apparently, the recipe actually meant bake at 375 for the entire time. I didn't realize this until after I had already placed the lasagna in the oven, and it was about halfway cooked. Everything seemed fine at first, so I poured myself a drink and texted her that I was excited for her to come over. She responded, saying she was on her way and would be there in about 15 minutes. Perfect, I thought. I was right on schedule. But just as I was about to finish my drink, I noticed something strange. There was a faint smell in the air, like smoke, but I brushed it off. Maybe the cheese is browning a little, I thought. I went back into the kitchen to check, and that's when I saw it. A small plume of smoke was coming out of the oven. My heart sank. I opened the oven door, and what I saw was not a delicious, golden brown lasagna. Instead, I was met with a scene straight out of a horror movie. The top layer of the lasagna was completely charred, and there was a small fire burning on the side of the dish. The flames were contained to just one area, but they were growing fast. Panicking, I slammed the oven door shut and stood there for a second, trying to process what had just happened. I'd never dealt with a fire in the kitchen before, and I wasn't exactly sure what to do. My first instinct was to throw water on it, but I quickly remembered that would probably make things worse. I grabbed the oven mitts, opened the oven door again, and tried to grab the lasagna with the mitts. Big mistake. The fire flared up even more, and I almost dropped the whole dish on the floor in my attempt to get it out. At this point, I was seriously starting to panic. My mind raced. Do I call the fire department? Is my kitchen going to burn down? What if she shows up and I'm just standing there with a flaming lasagna in my hands? What if she thinks I did this on purpose? My date was about 10 minutes away, and there was no way I could hide this disaster. Thinking quickly, I decided to grab the closest thing I could use to extinguish the fire. It was a small bottle of cooking spray. I know, I can already hear you judging me. But in that moment, it felt like my best option. I sprayed it directly on the fire, hoping the aerosol would put it out. Instead, it just made the flames flare up even higher for a few terrifying seconds. My heart was racing. My kitchen was starting to smell like burnt food and desperation. Luckily, after a few moments that felt like an eternity, the flames eventually subsided, leaving behind a sad, half-burnt lasagna that looked like it had been through a war. It was now more of a pile of melted cheese and burnt noodles than an actual dish. I stared at it in disbelief, wondering if this night could possibly get any worse. But then I remembered, my date was on her way. She would be here in less than 5 minutes, and I had no idea what I was going to do. I couldn't just serve her this charred mess. So, in a panic, I threw the burnt lasagna in the trash, grabbed the frozen pizza I had in the freezer as a backup, because what self-respecting adult doesn't have frozen pizza for emergencies, and slapped it in the oven. I was still recovering from the fire fiasco when she knocked on the door. I opened it, trying to look as casual as possible, but I'm sure she could tell something was off. I invited her in, and we went to the living room to chat for a bit while the pizza cooked. I made a feeble attempt at explaining that I was experimenting with a new recipe but that it didn't quite go as planned. She laughed and said, "Hey, it's cool. Everyone's kitchen has its moments, right?" I was relieved she didn't immediately run for the door, but I could tell she wasn't exactly thrilled. We sat down to eat, and as I took the first bite of the pizza, I realized I had set the oven too high, and it had come out a little, well, burnt. But at least it wasn't on fire. The rest of the evening was awkward. We talked for a while, but the chemistry was definitely off. There was a certain tension in the air that wasn't there before. She left earlier than I expected, saying something about having an early morning the next day. As she left, she gave me a quick hug and said, "Thanks for dinner." I think she was trying to be polite, but I could tell she wasn't going to be in a rush to come back anytime soon. I spent the rest of the night cleaning up, reflecting on how my impressive dinner had turned into a disaster. The lasagna that was supposed to be my crowning achievement in the kitchen had ended up almost burning down my apartment. The date itself, while not awful, was definitely not what I had imagined. In the end, I learned a few things. Never try to impress someone by cooking a dish you don't fully understand. Always have a backup plan, preferably something that doesn't involve fire, and maybe next time, just order takeout. Anyway, that's my TIFU. Hey, friends! If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. TIFU by ignoring my friend's warning and trying to impress my crush with a ridiculous stunt. So, this happened about 2 weeks ago, and I can't stop thinking about how much of an idiot I was. The whole thing started on a Friday afternoon when I was hanging out with my best friend, Matt. We've been close since high school, and while we do a lot of dumb things together, Matt's always been the kind of guy who knows where to draw the line between harmless fun and doing something that could go horribly wrong. I, on the other hand, have never been the most cautious person. That's where the trouble began. Now, to give some context, there's this girl, Sarah, that I've had a huge crush on for months. We met through mutual friends, and we get along great. The thing is, she's really into adventure sports, skydiving, bungee jumping, rock climbing, you name it. I'm not exactly what you would call an adrenaline junkie. In fact, I'm more of a sit-on-the-couch-and-watch sports kind of guy. But when I found out Sarah was into these things, I thought to myself, why not impress her with something spontaneous and exciting? Maybe that'll finally get her to notice me. Enter the idea. I had heard from one of my coworkers that there was this secret, off-the-beaten-path cliff diving spot nearby. It wasn't the kind of place you'd find on any tourist map. It was secluded, dangerous, and supposedly a lot of fun, just the kind of thing that would make me look like a daring and adventurous guy in front of Sarah. So, when Matt and I were hanging out, I casually brought it up. "Dude, I've been thinking," I said, "Sarah is super into extreme stuff. Maybe I should take her to that cliff diving spot. You know, show her I'm just as fearless as she is." Matt looked at me like I had just grown another head. "Are you serious? That place is insane, man. People get hurt there all the time. It's not just some fun cliff dive. You can't even really see the water clearly from up top, and people have gotten hurt trying to jump there." But I was determined. I mean, how hard could it be? It's just jumping off a cliff into water, right? Matt tried to talk me out of it, but I just brushed it off. "It's fine, I've watched a ton of videos online. I'll be careful. Besides, if I do this, Sarah will definitely be impressed." Matt sighed, shaking his head. "I really think you should reconsider, dude. Don't do it for her. Just be yourself. Trust me." I didn't listen to him. That night, I texted Sarah, asking if she wanted to go on an adventure with me that weekend. I didn't give her details, just told her it was something thrilling. She was totally on board, and I could tell she was excited by how quickly she replied. Saturday rolls around, and I pick Sarah up. I tried to play it cool, acting like it was no big deal, even though my heart was racing. The whole time, I kept thinking about how awesome it was going to be, how this would totally impress her. The drive was about 45 minutes to the spot, and I didn't say anything to Sarah about the potential dangers. I just kept talking about how fun it was going to be. When we finally arrived, I led Sarah to the edge of the cliff. The spot was even more terrifying than I had imagined. The drop was about 50 feet, maybe more, and the water beneath was much farther away than it seemed from the top. There was also a thick mist coming off the water, making it impossible to see the exact depth of the pool below. To make matters worse, the edge of the cliff was jagged and uneven, and the wind was picking up, making the whole situation feel even riskier. I tried to act calm and confident, as if this was all no big deal. Sarah, however, looked a little apprehensive. Are you sure this is safe? She asked, clearly second-guessing my plan. Of course it is, I said, too quickly. I've watched tons of people do it. It's totally fine. I wasn't really sure if that was true, but I didn't want to back down now. Plus, I didn't want to look like a wimp in front of her. So I climbed to the edge and pretended to look down confidently, even though I was terrified. I felt like I was about to have a panic attack, but I kept it together, or at least I tried to. Then came the worst part. Sarah stepped back, looking unsure. She clearly wasn't ready to jump, which was fine. I'd been hoping she wouldn't jump right away. This was supposed to be my moment to shine. So, I turned to her, trying to be suave. You know what? I'll go first, just to show you it's not so bad. Then you'll see how easy it is. I didn't even wait for her to respond. I took a deep breath, ran a few steps, and leaped off the cliff. For about half a second, I felt like a hero. I was soaring through the air, the wind rushing past me, thinking, this is going to be epic. She's definitely going to be impressed. Then I hit the water. Now, you'd think that hitting water from a 50-foot drop would be like hitting a solid wall of impact. And you'd be right. It felt like my whole body exploded as I crashed into the water, the force of the impact sending a shock through my entire spine. I immediately started to panic. I could barely breathe, and the cold, murky water made it even worse. My legs were numb, and I struggled to swim back to the surface. I finally managed to claw my way back up, gasping for air. The pain in my chest was unbearable, and my legs felt like jelly. I made it to the shore, coughing and sputtering like a fish out of water. I looked up, half expecting Sarah to be impressed by my daredevil act, but instead, she was standing at the edge of the cliff, her face pale with concern. Are you okay? She called down to me, clearly worried. I tried to wave it off, even though I was shaking. Yeah, just a little winded. That was awesome, right? But my body had other plans. I stumbled and collapsed on the shore, my head spinning and my chest feeling like it was on fire. Sarah immediately ran down the path to help me, her expression shifting from concern to panic. You need to go to a hospital, she said urgently, kneeling beside me. You look like you've been hit by a truck. Long story short, I ended up in the ER with bruised ribs and a sprained ankle. The doctor told me I was lucky nothing worse happened, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. The worst part? Sarah wasn't impressed at all. Instead of seeing me as this fearless, adventurous guy, she saw me as a reckless idiot who almost got himself seriously hurt. Needless to say, she was a little turned off by the whole thing. Matt, of course, was not surprised when I called him later to admit I'd made a huge mistake. I told you not to do it, man. You're lucky you didn't break your neck. I spent the next few days limping around, nursing my injuries, and contemplating how stupid I'd been. Not only did I almost kill myself trying to impress a girl, but I also ended up looking like an idiot in front of her. The worst part? I'm pretty sure Sarah now sees me as the guy who will do anything for attention, even if it's dangerous and dumb. So, yeah. Lesson learned. I'm never trying to impress a girl with a stunt like that again. Next time, I'll just stick to dinner and a movie. So, I've always had a thing for this girl I work with. Let's call her Emily. She's smart, funny, and has this incredible knack for making everyone around her feel at ease. We've been talking a lot recently, mostly at work, but a few times outside of work as well. Our conversations have always been lighthearted, but there's definitely been a certain chemistry building up between us, or at least that's what I told myself. Anyway, a few weeks ago, I decided that I wanted to take things to the next level and impress her. I figured the best way to do that would be to cook her a fancy dinner. Now, I'm no Gordon Ramsay, but I'm not a total disaster in the kitchen either. I figured if I went all out and made something complex and impressive, she'd be wowed. I started brainstorming dishes that would make me seem like a culinary genius. After some thought, I landed on a homemade lasagna. It seemed sophisticated enough but still accessible. I wanted to show that I could cook, but I didn't want to go too crazy and end up with something weird. I figured lasagna was a safe bet. Plus, it's a pretty good comfort food, and who doesn't love pasta? I spent the entire afternoon prepping the ingredients. I carefully shredded the cheese, diced up the vegetables, and browned the meat. It was all coming together perfectly. As the layers started stacking up in the pan, I was feeling pretty confident. I imagined Emily's face when I brought out this homemade masterpiece, and in my head, I could already hear her saying, "Wow, you're amazing." It was a good feeling, and I was pumped. Now, here's where I messed up. I didn't actually know how long lasagna needed to bake. I'd read the recipe, but I didn't really absorb the details. I just assumed it was going to take around 30 to 40 minutes because that's how long most things take, right? Plus, my oven had been a little temperamental lately, so I figured it would be fine if I left it in a little longer. So, I slid the lasagna into the oven, set the timer for 40 minutes, and decided to chill out a bit and get ready. I showered, got dressed, and even threw on a nice shirt for the occasion. I didn't want to look like a slob when I was trying to impress her. As I was finishing up, I smelled something not good. It was like a faint burning smell. I thought it was just the cheese, but I figured I'd check on it in a couple of minutes. When I opened the oven, my worst fear was confirmed. The lasagna was smoking. Not a little bit either. It was smoking so much that I could see the entire thing was black around the edges. My heart sank. I immediately turned off the oven and pulled the lasagna out, but it was already too late. The top layer had completely charred, and the whole thing had turned into a burnt, bubbling mess. At this point, panic set in. I was supposed to impress Emily, and now I had just created what could only be described as a culinary catastrophe. I quickly grabbed a few paper towels and tried to clean the mess in the oven, but it was a losing battle. The oven was filled with smoke, and I had to open the window to let some of it out. I had about an hour before Emily was supposed to arrive, and I had absolutely no idea what to do. I started Googling things like how to fix burnt lasagna and what to do if your food is ruined. The internet, as always, was no help. I couldn't make a new lasagna from scratch in time, and ordering takeout felt like I'd be admitting defeat. As I was standing there, looking at the charred remains of my dinner, I had a terrible idea. I could go out and buy a pre-made lasagna from the store, but I would have to pretend I made it myself. The idea of faking it made me cringe, but at this point, I was desperate. I threw on my jacket and ran to the nearest grocery store. Now, I thought I was being slick. I'd pick up a frozen lasagna, heat it up, and no one would be the wiser. What I didn't account for was how awkward it would be to buy frozen lasagna at the store while also trying to maintain some level of dignity. I grabbed the first box I could find and headed to the self-checkout. The whole time, I kept thinking about how Emily would react when I gave her this sad, store-bought dish. When I got home, I immediately threw the lasagna in the oven and hoped that it would cook quickly. At this point, I was so frazzled that I couldn't even remember how long it needed to cook. I was frantically watching the clock, trying to balance reheating the lasagna with making the place look nice. I lit some candles and threw on some music, hoping to distract her from the fact that I was basically serving her frozen food. The doorbell rang, and my stomach dropped. I greeted Emily at the door, trying my best to act casual. She smiled and complimented my place, which I had spruced up a little bit to make it seem like I had my life together. She asked how my day was, and I just nodded, trying to suppress the urge to scream internally. I led her to the dining room and tried to make small talk as I brought the lasagna to the table. I couldn't help but notice that Emily was looking at me a little weird, and I wasn't sure if it was because of the awkward tension or if she could somehow sense my anxiety. I cut a slice of the lasagna and put it on her plate, then did the same for myself. When I sat down, I noticed her inspecting the lasagna a little too closely. She took a bite, chewed, and then paused. I held my breath. Was it that bad? Was she going to say something? She said, "This is good." But, did you, buy this from the store? My face turned red. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I tried to smile and play it off, but she could see right through me. Yeah. I kind of messed up the homemade one, I confessed, laughing nervously. I didn't burn it, but, it was pretty close. So, yeah, I had to go with plan B. She burst out laughing. Oh my God, you're adorable, she said, still chuckling. Honestly, I was expecting you to mess up. But I have to admit, this is a really nice effort. You're just lucky I'm not a foodie, or this would be a disaster. We spent the rest of the evening talking, and despite my failings in the kitchen, we had a great time. Honestly, I think the whole situation ended up making us both feel more comfortable around each other. She didn't seem mad at all, if anything, it made her like me more. Moral of the story: don't try to impress people with something you're not comfortable doing. Stick to what you know, or at least don't try to fake it when you mess up. If nothing else, my burnt lasagna story will definitely be something we laugh about for a long time. I'm just thankful Emily is chill and didn't judge me for being a cooking disaster. TIFU by accidentally getting my boss fired and becoming the office pariah in the process. So this happened about 3 months ago. I work at a mid-sized tech company that prides itself on being a fun, laid-back workplace, the kind where employees dress casually, and there are free snacks, but still somehow manage to hit their targets. We have a pretty close-knit team, and the atmosphere is great. Everyone gets along well, and the bosses generally seem chill. One of my bosses, let's call him Dave, is a middle manager. He's one of those guys who tries a little too hard to be everyone's friend. He's always cracking jokes, organizing lunch outings, and constantly going on about how he's just one of the guys. People seem to tolerate him mostly because he's not a complete idiot and he actually knows his stuff when it comes to work. But there was always something a little off about him, like maybe he was trying just a little too hard to seem relatable. He had the energy of someone who thought they were a lot cooler than they really were. Now, I don't know if Dave had it out for me or if I just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, but I'm pretty sure I inadvertently set off a series of unfortunate events that led to his downfall. It all started when I made a pretty casual comment during one of our team meetings. I don't know what got into me that day. I was feeling particularly sarcastic and wasn't thinking things through. Dave had been rambling on about some new corporate initiative we had to implement, and he was giving this presentation that, frankly, was just really boring. As he was going on about how it was going to revolutionize our workflow, I muttered under my breath, "Yeah, right. This is going to be as successful as the last thing you tried." I said it quietly, but apparently not quietly enough. One of the other employees, let's call her Sarah, overheard me. Sarah and I have a pretty friendly rapport, and we've often joked around with each other at work, so I wasn't thinking too much about it when she burst out laughing. "Oh, come on. Dave, you heard that, right?" she said loud enough for everyone to hear. Dave didn't immediately respond, but I could tell he heard me. I could see him stiffen for a moment, but he quickly recovered and kept going with his presentation, albeit a little less enthusiastically. After the meeting, I felt a little guilty. I didn't want to hurt Dave's feelings, but at the same time, I didn't think I'd said anything that bad. I figured he would brush it off, especially since he usually gave off this "I'm too cool to care" vibe. The next few hours at work went by like any other, and I forgot about the whole thing. That is, until I got an unexpected message on Slack the next day. It was from our HR manager, Jessica. She asked me to come to her office for a quick chat. I thought nothing of it at first. HR is always doing random check-ins, and I figured this was just one of those. When I walked into Jessica's office, her expression was much more serious than I expected. "Hey, my name, I need to talk to you about something that happened during yesterday's meeting," she started. My stomach dropped. "Apparently, you made a comment about Dave's presentation, and it was, well, it didn't go over well with him." I was taken aback. "What?" "I just made a joke," I said, trying to play it cool. I know, but Dave didn't take it well, and he's actually pretty upset, Jessica explained. He's feeling undermined, and it seems like the whole team has noticed that there's some tension between you two. Now, at this point, I was getting concerned. I never intended to make Dave feel undermined or upset. I thought it was just a harmless joke. But then Jessica dropped the bombshell. Dave has asked for a transfer to a different department, she said. He wants to be moved off your team. I was floored. I had no idea that my little sarcastic comment had spiraled into this much drama. Wait, what? A transfer? I repeated, trying to process it. Jessica nodded. Yeah, he's requested it, and we're looking into it. He feels like he's not being respected here anymore. I couldn't believe it. I had just made an offhand remark, and now my boss was considering leaving? I felt absolutely terrible. The last thing I wanted was for him to think that I didn't respect him. Jessica gave me a stern look and told me to be more mindful of my comments in the future. I agreed and promised to keep my mouth shut from now on. But the worst part was yet to come. The next day, things at work were weird. I could feel the shift in energy. People were being unusually quiet around me, and no one seemed to want to make eye contact. I tried to joke around like I normally would, but it was like I had become the office pariah. Sarah, who I had jokingly spoken to about Dave, was now avoiding me. No one was laughing at my jokes anymore, and every time I spoke up during a meeting, people seemed to glance at each other awkwardly. It was like everyone had heard about my incident with Dave, and they were all silently judging me. Days passed, and Dave's request for the transfer became the subject of office gossip. People were whispering about it at lunch, and I could tell they were all blaming me. Some even started treating me like I was the one who had forced him out of the department. I tried to apologize to Dave, but he wasn't having any of it. He was distant, cold, and barely acknowledged my presence. It was like he couldn't even look at me without remembering what I'd said. At one point, I overheard him talking to another manager about how toxic the team had become and how he just couldn't take the pressure anymore. Eventually, Dave got transferred to another department, and things at work didn't really go back to normal. The atmosphere was tense, and I could tell that I was no longer part of the in-crowd. I couldn't figure out how to fix things, and no one was exactly lining up to help me. So here I am, 3 months later, still trying to recover from the mess I made. I didn't mean to get Dave transferred, and I definitely didn't mean to alienate myself from the rest of the office. But somehow, I managed to do both. Every time I see someone from my team, they look at me like I'm a walking disaster. And every time Dave passes me in the hall, he shoots me a look that says everything. I'm the reason his life got harder. I've learned my lesson. If you ever find yourself making a sarcastic remark about your boss in a meeting, don't. Just don't. Even if it seems harmless. I never thought one little joke could lead to something this big. So yeah, that's how I accidentally got my boss fired and became the office pariah. I'll be the first to admit, I seriously messed up. And to anyone who's thinking of making a snarky comment during a meeting, please, for the love of your career, just keep it to yourself. TIFU by accidentally sending an embarrassing message to my crush, then spending the whole day trying to fix it. I never thought I'd be the type to make a mistake like this. You know the kind, one of those moments you'll replay in your head for years and just cringe every time. Well, here's my story of how I royally screwed up and spent the entire day trying to salvage what was left of my dignity and, hopefully, my chances with someone I liked. It all started like any other Monday. I woke up late, as usual, had my coffee, and got ready for work. The usual routine, but with one thing on my mind, Amanda. Amanda's the kind of girl you dream about. She's funny, smart, has this natural glow about her, and she's way out of my league. We've been working in the same office for a few months now, and for some reason, we started talking. It began with casual small talk about work, but over time, we started chatting outside of office hours. I would see her grab coffee after work, and we'd exchange texts about everything from the latest Netflix shows to our mutual love of dogs. We were definitely getting closer. Over the past week or so, I had started to develop some serious feelings for her. She would send me these hilarious texts, and I'd find myself smiling like an idiot while reading them. And the worst part? I was starting to believe there might be a chance that she liked me too. It was like those cute, subtle signs that women drop, like laughing at all your dumb jokes and texting you back almost immediately. I had convinced myself that I might be in the zone, you know, the good zone. The one where it's clear you're not just a friend. The day of the incident, I had just finished a pretty good meeting at work, and I was in a great mood. I took out my phone, checked my messages, and saw that Amanda had texted me a few minutes earlier. I smiled, thinking it was something funny. I opened the message and saw she had sent me a meme, a ridiculously cute dog meme, which was completely in line with our usual conversations. I chuckled to myself and typed a response, "OMG, that's adorable. I'm going to steal this and pretend it was my idea." Before I hit send, I felt like I needed to add something else to make it more personal. You know, like a little joke or something that would show her how much I was really paying attention to the meme and how we had similar humor. Something witty. Something that would make her think, wow, he's cute and funny. You know what I mean? So, in my brilliance, I added, "If you ever need someone to pet that dog for you, I'm your man," winky face. I looked at the message, considered it for a moment, and then pressed send. I didn't think much of it at the time, but as soon as I saw the sent notification, my brain went into overdrive. Wait. What did I just do? I immediately looked back at the text. The words were staring at me like they were in bold print, "I'm your man." It hit me all at once, what if she thought I was trying to flirt with her? What if I just made this super awkward? The worst part? I wasn't even trying to make it flirty. I thought it was just a funny, casual thing to say. But knowing how these things could be interpreted, I began to panic. I had to fix this. Fast. I quickly opened up the message and saw that she had already seen it. Oh no. There was no taking it back now. I began typing and deleted 1,000 versions of what I was going to say. First, I thought I should just pretend nothing happened, but then I realized that would only make it worse. Next, I considered a humorous approach to backpedal, but that might come off as too forced. My mind was spinning in circles. I was stuck in an infinite loop of overthinking, which is exactly the kind of thing you don't need when you're trying to impress someone. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of brain-racking, I settled on a response, "Sorry, that came out weird. I meant like, if you ever need help with your dog or anything, I'm good at petting dogs. Totally not hitting on you, just wanted to clarify." I stared at the message for what felt like 10 minutes. Did this sound worse? Would she think I was covering up a failed attempt at flirting? I didn't know anymore. I hit send. And then I waited. Minutes passed. No reply. Then hours. My anxiety kept rising as I went through my day, glancing at my phone every few minutes, hoping for a text from her. Nothing. I kept wondering if I had just ruined everything, and the worst part was that I couldn't even tell if she was ignoring me on purpose or if she was just busy. I tried to focus on work, but the whole time, my mind kept wandering back to the situation. Finally, at the end of the day, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Amanda. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, praying for some kind of miracle. Her message read, "Ha ha ha, you're so cute. Don't worry, I didn't think you were hitting on me. It's all good. But now you've totally set the bar for dog petting. If you're serious, I'll take you up on that offer." I read the message again, letting out a huge sigh of relief. She wasn't mad. She wasn't weirded out. In fact, she actually thought it was cute. I had somehow avoided disaster. The rest of the night went smoothly, and we continued texting as if nothing had happened. But deep down, I knew that I would never, ever forget how I almost ruined everything with one ill-timed, overly enthusiastic comment. To this day, I still don't know what would have happened if I hadn't sent that second message. But what I do know is that I will never, ever underestimate the power of a single text message again. Sometimes, the smallest slip-up can turn into a full-on disaster, and the only thing you can do is try your best to fix it, one awkward text at a time. Lesson learned: when texting someone you like, maybe just keep it a little more chill. Oh, and never, ever try to be too clever. But hey, at least I'm still talking to her, right? Baby steps. TIFU by accidentally sending my ex a very embarrassing photo of my new girlfriend while trying to send her a nice picture of my dog. So, here's the situation. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and my ex and I broke up about 6 months ago. It was a pretty messy breakup, but we had been together for almost 4 years, so I'd say I took it harder than she did. I spent a lot of time wallowing in my own misery, but eventually, I started moving on. I met a new girl, Sarah, who's funny, smart, and way more emotionally stable than my ex ever was. Honestly, she's been a breath of fresh air. We've been dating for a couple of months, and everything has been going great. Here's where the problem started. Last week, my ex texted me. I don't know why, but I guess she was trying to rekindle some form of friendship or maybe just get a reaction out of me. I wasn't really sure how to handle it, so I just responded briefly, trying to keep things civil but neutral. We exchanged a few texts, and then I didn't hear from her for a few days. Honestly, I didn't really think much of it. She moved on, I moved on, life was moving on. That brings us to today. This morning, I woke up and walked into the living room to see Sarah sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She was looking at pictures of my dog, Charlie, who's basically the love of my life. I've had him since he was a puppy, and I always send people pictures of him because, well, he's adorable. I wanted to send Sarah a picture of Charlie as well, just to let her know how much I love him and how he's been such a positive part of my life since everything went south with my ex. So, like any sane person would do, I opened up my gallery, selected a picture of Charlie doing his signature puppy eyes thing, and hit the send button. Now, I should clarify that I'm a guy who's not super tech-savvy. I can navigate social media and send texts just fine, but when it comes to managing my phone's camera roll or making sure I'm sending the right photo, I can be a little clumsy. I sent the photo, but I must have gotten distracted because immediately after hitting send, I went back to scrolling through my phone, looking for other things to do. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed with a new message from my ex. I froze. It was a simple hey text. I hadn't realized that my ex and I were still texting in the same thread. I think I'd just forgotten to delete the conversation, or maybe I had been procrastinating on doing so. In my panic, I thought, oh no, did I accidentally send her something inappropriate? I quickly opened the thread and saw my message was already sent. What I hadn't noticed was that just before I hit send, my phone had automatically scrolled to a different part of my gallery. And there it was. Instead of the sweet, innocent picture of Charlie, I had sent my ex a very, very personal photo. It was a picture of me and Sarah, taken last weekend when we had gone hiking. I had thought it would be a cute photo to send to Sarah, a candid shot of the two of us sitting on a rock, laughing in the sun. But, I wasn't exactly prepared for how much of me and Sarah's skin was on display in that particular picture. We both got a little too comfortable in the moment, and let's just say that our outfits, while perfectly fine for the hike, left very little to the imagination in certain areas. I don't know why I didn't notice it earlier, but in the midst of sending a photo of my dog, I had, by some cruel twist of fate, sent her one of the most embarrassing photos I have of myself and my new girlfriend. The worst part? The caption that went with it was just look at this amazing view we got to see. Panic set in. My mind immediately started racing with 100 different scenarios of how my ex was going to react. Would she text me back immediately with some snarky remark? Would she just leave me on read and never speak to me again? Did she still have feelings for me? Was she going to somehow use this as an opportunity to ruin my current relationship? I scrambled to open the message thread and was horrified to see that the message had already been read. The little red notification below the text was lit up, and I realized I had no choice but to wait for her response. I waited for a few agonizing minutes, but there was nothing. I started to feel my chest tighten. I was mentally bracing myself for whatever was coming next. But nothing. She didn't reply. She didn't even react. Just when I was about to start Googling how to apologize for sending an embarrassing photo of myself to my ex, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Sarah texting me. I exhaled a sigh of relief. Okay, everything's fine. It's just Sarah. It's gonna be okay, I thought. But when I opened the message, I almost had a heart attack. It was a screen capture of the photo I had sent to my ex, with a laughing emoji attached to it. I had to pause for a moment and gather my thoughts. It wasn't my ex who responded. It was Sarah. Apparently, Sarah had a Friends of Friends feature on her phone that pulled in all the photos and videos from my social media, and somehow, it also synced up with my gallery. So, instead of just sending it to Sarah, I had accidentally sent it to her, too, but she had already seen it and thought it was hilarious. She sent me a message saying, "I didn't know you had such a fun side to you," and attached a laughing emoji. It took a minute for my brain to process everything. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or apologize profusely. Finally, I sent a message to my ex, nervously typing, "Sorry about that. Wrong photo. That was for someone else. Please disregard." The seconds felt like hours as I waited for her to respond. The message didn't even say seen for the longest time. When it finally did, I got a simple reply, "LOL, okay, no worries." And that was it. In the end, I apologized to Sarah, who found the whole thing amusing, and she even thought it was adorable how flustered I had gotten. My ex, thankfully, didn't hold it against me either. So, to sum up, TIFU by accidentally sending my ex a very personal photo of myself and my new girlfriend while trying to send a simple picture of my dog. Fortunately, it didn't cause a full-blown disaster, but I definitely learned to double-check my gallery before hitting send in the future. TIFU by forgetting my wedding anniversary and trying to cover it up with the most absurdly convoluted plan ever. So, it all started a few weeks ago when my wife, Lily, mentioned offhandedly that our wedding anniversary was coming up soon. Like most guys, I nodded, smiled, and then immediately forgot. We've been married for 6 years, and while I'm not a terrible husband, I'm definitely not great with dates. Birthdays? I'm good. Holidays? Not too bad. But anniversaries? You'd think after 6 years I'd have this thing down. But no, I had completely spaced on it. The day before our anniversary, I was in the middle of a busy workday when Lily texted me, "I'm so excited for tomorrow. Can't believe it's been 6 years already." That's when it hit me, oh, crap, I had done absolutely nothing for our anniversary. No gift. No dinner reservation. No thoughtful gesture. Nothing. Panic set in. I started brainstorming ideas, but nothing was coming to me. I could get her flowers, sure, but I didn't want it to feel last minute. I needed to go bigger. I needed to wow her. I mean, we've been married 6 years, this is supposed to be one of the big ones, right? I couldn't let it be a forgettable anniversary. I had a flash of inspiration. I would throw together a surprise dinner at home. We'd eat her favorite meal, I'd make it all romantic, and I'd make it feel like a special evening, even if I didn't have a gift ready. Plus, if I cooked it myself, that would make it personal and meaningful. At least that's what I kept telling myself. I spent the next several hours planning, and the more I thought about it, the more I was convinced this could work. I went all out. I ordered all the ingredients for her favorite meal, salmon, mashed potatoes, asparagus, and some fancy dessert I couldn't pronounce but thought looked impressive. I also bought candles, fairy lights, and even a little bouquet of flowers. All of this I hid in the trunk of my car. I had it all figured out, except for one thing: I still hadn't come up with a cover story. I realized that, in my panic, I had failed to actually consider how I would explain myself when Lily came home from work and found me scrambling in the kitchen like a madman. She'd definitely ask why I was making such a fuss, and I couldn't just tell her that I'd forgotten it was our anniversary. That would be humiliating. So, I needed a diversion. This is where things started to spiral out of control. I remembered that Lily had been talking about how much she loved this new bakery down the street. Their cakes are out of this world, she'd said just the other day. I figured that I could use this to my advantage. If I told her I was going to pick up a cake from the bakery, I could stall her for just long enough to set everything up without her suspecting anything. The plan was simple: I would text her right before she got home and tell her that I was picking up a cake from the bakery, which would explain my sudden disappearance. Meanwhile, I'd dash around the kitchen setting everything up. I texted her, "Hey babe, I'm picking up a cake from that new bakery you love. Be home in 30 minutes. She replied, "Oh, yay. Can't wait to see it." Great, I was in the clear. Or so I thought. Now, here's where the first wrench was thrown into my perfect plan. Lily decided to surprise me by getting home early. I hadn't even started cooking yet. My phone buzzed. Lily was at the door. I panicked. There I was, with no cake, no gift, no dinner cooking, and a complete lack of any reasonable excuse. I froze, staring at my phone. The sound of the front door opening made me jump. In my panic, I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the flowers from the trunk of my car and ran into the kitchen, frantically arranging them in a vase. I was hoping that if she walked in, I could act casual and tell her that I was setting up for a special evening. She walked in, and the first thing she said was, "What are you doing?" I awkwardly responded, "Oh, just setting the mood. You know, for the cake." That was my big cover story. The cake that I hadn't picked up yet. Brilliant. Lily raised an eyebrow but didn't push the issue. She smiled and said, "I'm guessing we're having a surprise dinner then?" I nodded, trying to appear confident despite feeling like I was about to implode. "Yep. Just wait until you see the meal I've got planned." She smiled sweetly, and I could tell she was excited, but the whole situation felt increasingly absurd. I had to cook dinner from scratch in under 30 minutes, make the whole place look romantic, and somehow cover up the fact that I had forgotten our anniversary. At this point, I just started throwing things together. I popped the salmon in the oven, threw the potatoes in a pot, and set up the candles. Then I remembered something crucial: I had completely forgotten to light the candles. So, now I had to set the scene and then pretend that I had intentionally made everything so dim. I turned off all the lights and lit the candles, only to realize that the one thing I hadn't planned for was how terribly dim it was in the room. It looked like a horror movie. Lily raised her eyebrows again. "Is it supposed to be this dark in here?" I laughed nervously. "Oh yeah, it's part of the ambience." I'm sure I looked like a deer in headlights. Then the real kicker came. As the food was finishing up, the doorbell rang. It was the bakery delivery guy. He handed me the cake, and I realized in that moment that I had no idea how to explain this to Lily. I had promised I was picking up the cake, but now there was a cake just appearing at the door like magic. When I brought the cake inside, Lily looked at me with a mix of confusion and concern. "Wait, so, you ordered the cake? But you told me you were picking it up." I froze. Then, in my most charming voice, I said, "I thought it'd be nice if I surprised you with a professional cake to go with our dinner." She looked at me for a moment, processing everything. I could see her piecing it together, but I was too deep into the charade to back out now. Finally, she smiled and said, "You know, you're not the best at this whole surprise thing, but, thank you. I appreciate the effort." And just like that, my grand plan to cover up my massive failure turned into one of the most awkward and convoluted anniversaries of all time. The night ended with us laughing about how ridiculous the whole thing had been. We did manage to enjoy the dinner, though, and the cake was surprisingly delicious. Still, I'll never live this one down. TLDR, I forgot our wedding anniversary and tried to cover it up by planning a surprise dinner. Things went horribly wrong when I panicked, lied about picking up a cake, and set up an embarrassingly awkward evening. My wife, being a saint, still appreciated the effort. TIFU by accidentally becoming a hero and then ruining it all in the worst possible way. I never thought I'd be one of those people who'd end up on the news for doing something accidentally heroic. You know, those people who suddenly find themselves in the middle of a situation, do something impulsive, and get hailed as a hero only for them to be totally confused about how they ended up there? Yeah, that was me. It all started on a random Tuesday morning. I was on my way to work, which, like most people, meant I was groggily making my way to the bus stop with one shoe untied, half a breakfast sandwich in my hand, and my brain still in snooze mode. The air was cold, a typical fall morning in the city, and I was hoping I wouldn't miss the bus like I did last week. I was already behind schedule. So, I'm standing at the corner of 5th and Pine, waiting for the bus, when I hear a faint scream. At first, I didn't pay attention, assuming it was just some kid messing around or someone watching a video too loudly. But then, it happened again. A much more urgent scream. I looked around, scanning the street, trying to pinpoint the source. That's when I saw her. A woman was standing on the sidewalk near the crosswalk, holding her hand to her chest and looking straight at something across the street. She was frozen, staring at a man in the middle of the road, clearly in distress. I was confused for a second, not understanding what was going on. But the moment I saw the guy stumbling, I realized something was wrong. He was limping, and there was something about his posture that screamed danger. He was acting erratically, waving his arms, and knocking over trash cans as if he was completely disoriented. At this point, I could see a couple of other pedestrians noticing too, but no one was moving. They were just staring, probably trying to figure out if they should do something. I don't know what came over me, but instinct kicked in, and I started walking toward him. I figured I should help or at least figure out if he was hurt. As I got closer, I noticed the man was clutching his chest, gasping for breath. He was having some kind of medical emergency, and it was bad. His face was pale, and his eyes were wide in panic. I panicked too, because I'm not exactly trained in first aid or anything, but I knew I had to do something. I shouted at him to sit down, but he didn't respond, and that's when I saw it. His right hand was clutching something. I wasn't sure what it was at first, but then I realized it was a knife. He was holding it with a white-knuckled grip, and it was shaking. My first thought was, oh no, this guy is having a mental breakdown, but then I remembered what I'd seen on TV about people getting into bizarre situations when they were in some kind of medical distress. At that moment, I must have done the most impulsive thing possible. I reached out, grabbed his arm, and yanked the knife away. I don't even know why I thought that was a good idea. I guess I was trying to protect him or myself, or maybe I just wanted to stop him from hurting anyone else. Whatever it was definitely a decision made without thinking. The moment I got the knife out of his hand, I turned to the bystanders and shouted for help. Call 911. Someone, please call 911. People started pulling out their phones, and a few rushed toward me. I held the man up and kept talking to him, trying to keep him conscious and calm, though I had no idea what I was doing. He was barely responding, muttering something under his breath, and I couldn't understand what it was. A few minutes later, the ambulance arrived. The paramedics quickly took over, and I was still standing there, completely dumbfounded. I had no idea what had just happened, but I had a weird sense of pride, like maybe I had done something good. The bystanders around me were praising me, calling me a hero for grabbing the knife and helping the guy. That should have been the end of it, right? But no, it wasn't. Later that afternoon, I got a call from the police. Apparently, the guy I helped wasn't just having a medical emergency, he had been in a full-on psychotic episode, possibly triggered by some kind of substance, and he was a suspect in an ongoing investigation. The knife wasn't a random weapon, he'd stolen it from a nearby store. He had been trying to rob a local convenience store before everything went sideways. I was floored. I was just trying to help a guy in distress, and now I was being asked to come down to the station to give a statement. They needed to confirm the details of the encounter, since I'd been the one who had taken the knife from him. They wanted to make sure I wasn't involved in any way. I agreed to go down, but the whole thing started to unravel the more I thought about it. The man had been erratic, yeah, but I had no idea what was really going on. If I hadn't stepped in, he could have hurt himself or someone else, but on the flip side, what if I had made things worse by removing the knife? What if there was something I should have done differently? Maybe I should have just stayed out of it. The police interrogation was long and tedious, and when I finally walked out of the station, my head was spinning. I felt like I'd been put through the ringer. The media caught wind of the story too, and suddenly, I was the guy who saved the day. I was being hailed as a hero, and people were even saying I should get a medal. There were interviews, articles, and people were congratulating me left and right. But here's the kicker, the whole thing spiraled out of control. The media had gotten a few facts wrong. Instead of focusing on the fact that the guy was in distress and had a mental health episode, the story turned into something about a hero who stopped a dangerous criminal. The story got bigger than it should have, and I was suddenly thrust into a situation I didn't know how to handle. I did the only thing I knew how to do, I panicked. I started dodging interviews, ignoring calls, and trying to lie low. The pressure of being seen as some kind of hero was suffocating. I wasn't a hero, I was a guy who acted on impulse and got lucky. Eventually, the media moved on, but not before I got a barrage of strange messages, including one from the guy's family accusing me of making the situation worse. So, yeah, I inadvertently became a hero, but in the process, I ruined my own reputation and couldn't escape the constant reminder of that day. The whole thing was so surreal, and now, every time I walk past that street corner, I wonder how I could have handled it better. Maybe I should have just stayed on the bus that morning. In the end, I guess I learned one thing: some heroes never wanted the cape. And sometimes, it's better to stay out of other people's problems, no matter how much you think you're helping. So, this happened last weekend. It all started when my friends and I decided to go on a small road trip to a lake about 2 hours away from our town. The idea was simple: pack some snacks, blast some music, enjoy the scenic drive, and just relax by the water. I had been working non-stop for the last month, and this was the first time I had a full weekend off, so I was really looking forward to it. Little did I know, this trip would end up being a disaster. We planned to meet at my place at 10 a.m. on Saturday. I had volunteered to drive, which I thought was a good idea since I knew the area better, and I have a decent-sized car that could fit all of our stuff. The night before, I packed a cooler with drinks, snacks, and some sandwiches. I also grabbed a blanket and a couple of portable chairs, as well as my phone and a portable charger, just in case. I didn't expect to need it, but you never know. When the clock hit 10 a.m., my friends were nowhere to be seen. I texted them, asking if they were still coming, and one by one, they responded with a slew of excuses. Mike was stuck in traffic, Sarah couldn't find her sunglasses, and Kyle was running a bit behind because he was still getting dressed. Fine, I thought. I was in no rush. By 11:30 a.m., everyone had finally arrived, and we were ready to hit the road. As we all piled into my car, Sarah, the loudest of the bunch, immediately started playing her playlist on the Bluetooth speaker. This playlist was full of upbeat pop songs, which I was fine with at first. But after an hour of hearing the same 10 songs on repeat, I was starting to get a little irritated. I suggested we switch it up, maybe try some classic rock or something more laid back. But Sarah wasn't having it. She insisted that this playlist was vibes and refused to budge. Whatever. I decided to ignore the music and focus on the road. After all, the drive wasn't bad, and the scenery was nice. But about 30 minutes into the drive, I started to feel my stomach growl. I realized I hadn't eaten anything since breakfast, and the snacks I had packed were just sitting there, taunting me. I glanced at the cooler, which was sitting at my feet in the passenger seat, and thought, I'll grab a sandwich. I unwrapped one of the sandwiches, turkey and cheese, and took a big bite. As I chewed, I felt something weird. Something a little off about the sandwich. But I kept chewing. It was fine, right? It was probably just my imagination. But no, the more I chewed, the more the sandwich tasted like mold. I immediately stopped, spat out the bite, and checked the sandwich. Sure enough, the bread was green and soggy. I gagged a little, then frantically opened the cooler to find the rest of the sandwiches. They were all the same. Green, slimy, and covered in a strange, fuzzy mold. I could hardly believe it. I had checked the sandwiches the night before. They were perfectly fine. Guys! I shouted, pulling the sandwiches from the cooler and showing them to my friends. These are all moldy. What the hell? Mike looked at the sandwiches with a face of disgust. Dude, what happened? Those weren't moldy last night? I shrugged, confused and kind of grossed out. I don't know. I packed them last night and everything seemed fine. Maybe I didn't close the cooler properly or something? We were all staring at the sandwiches in disbelief, wondering if we could salvage any of them or if we should just toss them. But of course, my friends couldn't help but make jokes. Great. We're going to starve to death by a lake, Kyle quipped. After about 5 minutes of lamenting our fate, I decided we needed to stop for food. I pulled off the highway to a small, rural gas station and headed inside, hoping to find something edible. The gas station was tiny, and the shelves were stocked mostly with chips, candy, and various microwavable meals that didn't look particularly appetizing. I grabbed a pack of trail mix, some granola bars, and a couple of bottles of water, then we all piled back into the car. We got back on the road, but by this point, it was already 2 p.m. and we hadn't even reached the lake yet. Sarah was getting restless and started playing her playlist again. By this time, I was just trying to keep it together, but I couldn't ignore the fact that the sandwiches had ruined my appetite, and now I was stuck with only trail mix to eat. Finally, we arrived at the lake. The place was beautiful, clear water, surrounded by tall pine trees, and there were hardly any people around. Perfect, right? We found a spot on the shore, set up the blanket, and settled in. I was grateful for the peacefulness, even if the morning had been a total nightmare. But then, disaster struck again. I had forgotten the sunscreen. I had assumed it was in my bag, but after a frantic search, I realized I'd left it at home. The sun was already high, and I knew I would be burnt to a crisp in no time if I didn't do something. I turned to my friends for help, but of course, no one had extra sunscreen. So, I did what anyone in my situation would do. I asked a couple of strangers nearby if they had any. One woman looked at me like I was insane, but then she handed me a bottle of what I hoped was sunscreen. I didn't read the label too carefully, just squirted it onto my skin and rubbed it in. I soon realized that what I had just used wasn't sunscreen. It was sunscreen lotion for babies. Yes, you read that right. Baby lotion. Not only was I now smearing greasy, sweet-smelling lotion all over my body, but the texture was sticky and left me feeling like a human slip-and-slide. I tried to wash it off in the lake, but it didn't work. I was now the embarrassing, sticky guy covered in baby lotion at the beach. My friends, naturally, found this hilarious. I spent the next couple of hours trying to avoid the sun, feeling sticky and miserable while everyone else had fun. Finally, around 6 p.m., I decided I'd had enough and suggested we head back. The drive home was much quieter. Sarah was still playing her playlist, but I just couldn't deal with it anymore. My brain had shut down from a day full of failures, and I was too tired to care. We finally got back to town at 8 p.m., and I dropped everyone off at their respective places. By the time I got home, I was exhausted. I realized that my idea of a relaxing weekend had turned into a comedy of errors. I collapsed into bed, hoping I could at least salvage the rest of my weekend with a good night's sleep. It didn't work. I woke up at 3 a.m. with a feverish headache, realizing I had gotten sunburned after all. The baby lotion, of course, didn't protect me at all. So, yeah. That was my weekend. I went on a trip to relax, but instead, I got moldy sandwiches, a sticky mess of lotion, and a killer sunburn. Next time, I'm staying home. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.